Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to talk about something different. Instead of focusing on the next stage after medieval culture, I decided to tell you about something that is part of how Georgians lived in the past or even today. Well, today I'm going to talk to you today about traditional Georgian clothing, which usually nowadays we refer to as Georgian costumes. As you probably know, today modern Georgians wear just ordinary clothing, just like Europeans and everybody else. But sometimes you may see, if you come to Georgia, you may see that very often. Now, let's look at this first slide. Very often you may see in the streets of Georgia, Georgian young men and women walking around wearing something that displays some traditional either ornaments or something from their past. Even in the time of COVID, when we had to wear those face masks, some creative people decided to put up those traditional Georgian embroidery on their face masks, which still displayed the past. So Georgians like wearing their history and their cultural heritage as part of their everyday lives and incorporating it in their everyday lives. There is also, now look at the next slide where we have hats, traditional Georgian hats. Also, if you walk in the streets of Georgia, you may see this traditional hats for sale. Especially foreign tourists are very, very keen on buying those hats because they are very pretty and they also display something from our history, and it makes a nice souvenir after all. Also, if you, now next slide displays the traditional Georgian dance, which is bound to have as part of it traditional Georgian costumes, especially this chocha, this traditional men's costume, and the Georgian dress. I'm going to tell you about it a bit later. Not much later. Let's move on to the next one, which displays this traditional Georgian chocha and the lady's dress. The thing is that this, which we consider as probably the most traditional element in our in this Georgian clothing, is probably not unique, let's say, to Georgians, because most Caucasian people tend to wear something similar. However, Georgian version of it somehow differs from the other variations of this same chocha. Now you see on one side there are men sitting wearing traditional Georgian chocha achaluchi, by which we mean chocha are some kind of jacket and it's a very long jacket, and they have something like pockets on both sides, which are not pockets. They are more like carriers for cartridge, for gun cartridges or bullets. But nowadays, if you see somebody wearing this chocha, please don't imagine that they have bullets in them. It's just the symbolic and decorative elements these days. However, in the past, the accessories were absolutely inseparable elements of these traditional costumes. They also wore daggers on the belts, and belts were quite an important accessory. They were made of sometimes silver, decorated richly, and those daggers and swords were an inseparable part because Georgia was at war most of the time. And you see on the other side a woman, a lady, wearing this traditional Georgian dress. The long dress with a very large belt and sleeveless jacket on top of it, and she's also wearing a headpiece called chihtikopi. Now, what we have documented material that lets us know about what the authentic Georgian traditional clothing looked like in the past comes very much from the photographs dated to the beginning of the 20th century. Earlier information, however, can be traced from the stela or gravestones, relief sculptures, wall paintings, especially the ones which include the traditional costumes of kings and monarchs, and the portraits of sponsors of churches. And also we have paintings of foreign travelers who were very interested in traditional Georgian costumes. Also, ancient Greek historians such as Xenophon and Strabo and Herodotus also inform us about the traditional clothing of the Georgians. There is a lot of research made by Georgians about the traditional Georgian costumes and fashion in Georgia throughout the centuries, and most of them are printed in Georgian language. There is a good reason to think that in the way we know the traditional Georgian clothing, the way that it has reached its final image, it probably was formed and shaped in the 18th century by some time in the 18th century. And what we see in the photographs display the traditional costumes and traditional fashion of the time after the 18th century, mostly. Now let's move on to the next one. This was not the only style that Georgians used to wear. In the past, much earlier, when Georgia was under Byzantine Empire, there was a very strong connection between Byzantine culture, Byzantine fashion, especially when it came to the way monarchs were dressed. Well, this is something that we have as a reconstruction from the wall painting, not wall painting, I think it's from a relief sculpture in Oshki, which is in the present-day Turkey. And this reconstructed variation, which was made later by somebody, displays this dress of the nobility, upper class people, who were dressed in this very rich, and especially when it comes to fabric, you can trace the difference between upper class society, what they wore, and the lower class society. Usually lower class society wore linen and wool, while the upper class society could afford much precious fabric such as silk and other materials. Now here in the next one we have a reconstruction of the dress of King Tamar or Queen Tamar. Can we show the next one? This beautiful, lovely color blue. They say that it had 3,621 pearl beads sewed to the dress. And it has a traditional collar, which is usually in Georgian it is called maniagi. And it has this lovely long piece in the front. And it also used a lot of gold clasps, lots of them, like more than 100. This is also another reconstruction, which is from the 12th century. The next one already displays some kind of Muslim influence or Arabic influence, let's say, in the design of Georgian dress of Georgian nobility, which is Bekajar Ali's dress, and it's dated to the 13th century, I believe. You can see that this ornamentation and the way and the fabric itself, it's very Asian, very Eastern. This Eastern style is coming into fashion. Speaking of Eastern style, our King Erekle II, who is often blamed for uniting us with Russia, he was very keen on Eastern style himself, but, well, keen is one thing, but he also had to be, because it was a kind of almost political agreement, let's say. Like, for example, this robe, the one you see, the next one, the whitish or cream robe, it was given to King Erekle as a gift from Shah of Iran, and he had to wear it as a sign of declaring obedience to the Shah. Erekle put this on top of his Georgian tunic, and the people who surrounded him told him that Shah would not be happy with it. It would be some kind of political statement, and he said, I know what I am doing, by which he meant that he in fact declared partial obedience to the Shah. And that was a kind of symbolic meaning behind it, behind him wearing it on top of his Georgian garment. Well, after Erekle signed the treat, Georgievsk treat, we were united with Russia. Since then, European culture came into use, and it showed in fashion more than in anything else, in any other aspect of culture in Georgia. Especially the nobility again, like princes, and here you can see in the next slide, you can see Prince Garsevan Javjavadze in his very, very, very European clothing, very European garment. Javjavadze family was particularly famous for their pro-Western and pro-European taste. Another member of the Javjavadze family, in the next slide, you can see the Queen of Samegrelo, Ekaterina Javjavadze Dadiani, who you see, she even looks a bit like Queen Victoria in this picture. She also was very keen on pro-Western and pro-European taste. And that was one of the things that Erekle is often accused of all our troubles, which began after this Georgievsky agreement. But in fact, in his time, we have to say, for the sake of justice, we have to say that in those days, being united with Russia for us, for Georgians, meant it was like a doorway to Europe. It was a window to Europe. That's what it meant those days. Because we were surrounded by Iranian and Arabic invaders and neighbors from the other side. So that was the only way out, to be united with Russia. But it's no longer the case these days, so we have to find a way out of there. So Ekaterina, Queen Ekaterina was daughter of Alexander Javjavadze, and she was a wife of Dadiani, and she was the last queen of Samegrelo, of Megrelia, as the Russians are keen to say. She established a unique, arguably European royal style in Georgian fashion. After her husband's death in 1853, Ekaterina became the de facto ruler of the Principality of Samegrelo, following the abolition of the Principality of Samegrelo by the Russian Empire. Ekaterina lived first in Russia and then in Europe. She died at the summer residence and is buried in Martveli Cathedral today. That's where her grave is. This portrait of her was completed in Paris around 1865. Here she is depicted wearing the red ribbon of St. Catherine's Grand Cross and the order bestowed upon her in 1856 during Emperor Alexander II's coronation day. She was called the Tavarina by Russians. Tavari, well, it's a prince, and Tavarina is a kind of feminine variation of the princess, well, kind of. So she was appointed as a lady in waiting to Empress Maria Alexandrovna, which is also indicated in the portrait. Her left shoulder, as you see here, is adorned with the blue ribbon of the Order of St. Andrew, while on her right is a bronze medal and ribbon of St. George. This award was presented to her for her service in the Russo-Turkish War, during which she personally commanded the Samegrelo Principality's army in one battle. Now, this is what I wanted to tell you about this fashion and styles, the way they changed for nobility, upper class society. But that's not what we could call a traditional clothing, except the choha haluchi, of course. But this influences like Eastern styles, Western styles, they were part of fashion, but they are not exactly traditional clothing. Now let's look at what common, ordinary people wore, and they still do, especially in the highlands of Georgia. It is, I mean, what I would say is the most traditional Georgian style in clothing. I think it's what they used to wear in Khevsureti. Can we show the next slide, which shows this Khevsuretian, let's say. You can see one shirt, let's say, or tunic, worn by men, and the other one worn by women. The women's one were usually either longer, or they used to wear them on top of their skirts, while men used to wear these tunics on top of their trousers, of course. What is very distinct in this Khevsuretian clothing, particularly distinct, is this excessive use of embroidery. And this embroidery, the ornaments there, use a lot of lots of crosses. The patterns are richly, heavily decorated with crosses. It's so obvious that some scholars even wanted to suggest that maybe it's not a unique Georgian style and maybe they were affected by Crusaders or some kind of other cultures, but no, it actually is very, very Georgian style. Probably more Georgian than any other traditional costume was. Can we show the next one? It's also same from the Highlands. But it's the display jackets and the skirt. I think it's a skirt, the other one on the other side. The next one is a dress for women from Khevsureti again, the red one. Are we showing the next slide? And you can see the colors of embroidery. These threads were especially dyed from by natural dyers. And it's almost like science. You know, if you go to Khevsureti, they have all sorts of information, a lot of information about what plant or what mineral makes what color. I remember when I used to do embroidery, I was very keen on sticking to these natural pigments and natural colorings, natural dyers. And there is a lot of information, enormous. I mean, they have lots of different things which give different colors. And sometimes they mix those dyers, those pigments or plants to make different colors. The next slide displays this full dress, full vestment, or not vestment, it's kind of garment of Khevsuretian women. It includes dress, again, richly embroidered, and the lower part is actually knitted. And they used to make fabrics by knitting them themselves. Again, you can see this cross, almost like Bishop's Homophorion. That's what it looks like, if you ask me. But it's actually a veil for a woman. There is also in the middle, you can see the men's tunic again. I hope it's a better photograph. Again, the next slide displays a woman's headpiece. And sometimes Georgian girls and Georgian young women these days are very keen on using similar things as their hats and scarves. It's very fashionable. As I told you, Georgians like wearing their culture and their past and kind of bring it to life. Well, it's not, we can't really say that it's just in the past, you know, Khevsuretian people still do it nowadays, so it's not just in the past that it belongs to. I think we can skip the next slide, but no. The next slide shows you again, it's an upper class society Abkhazian dress. Now, this Georgian dress, when we say Georgian dress and Georgian chokha, it's difficult to suggest that there is only one type of it, because all the regions of Georgia have different variations. If you come to Georgia, go to the museum, and you are going to see lots of variations on this theme, let's say. The next one displays how the common men were dressed in Svaneti and Imereti. Now, when I showed you that chokha haluchi was used in daily life by upper class society again. But the lower class people had to do a lot of work. So chokha haluchi for them was a fancy clothing, which they had. They had them, but wearing them every day when they had to do lots of chores, lots of things in fields, it was not very practical. So it was basically more like fancy clothing for events whenever they were invited somewhere. Now let's say something about hats. Great variation of Georgian hats is usually displayed on those tourist kind of places. If you go there, if you come to Georgia, you will see them. Now, in the upper left corner, you can see Gahetian hats. They are more like square-shaped, if you look at them from above. And they look more like monks' skufia, if you know what the Orthodox monks wear. That's what they look like. But they are made of felt, of wool. In the upper right corner, you see Svanetian hat. It's also made of felt, again, of wool, but it's a different shape. It has a different shape. And these differences are very obvious signs where they come from. We look at them and we know this is a Svanetian hat and these are Gahetian hats. Now in the middle you see different hats again. There is an Imeretian hat, there is Hefsuretian hat, which you can probably recognize because of its embroidery. There is a hat from Heavy. Well, I don't know how to show you which one is that, but... And also, in eastern Georgia, they had a different type of hat, which was called kabalachi. And that was more like a veil with a hat on top of it. I mean, it had a very long scarf. Imagine scarf attached to a hat. It looked a bit like that. Well, I wanted to put it in here, but for some reason I haven't. Now, there is also a very distinct clothing for shepherds, which is probably, again, can we show the next slide? Which is probably not very terribly unique for Georgians, because it was used by all people in the Caucasus, all the shepherds. It was very common in the area, with Caucasian mountains. Whoever went to look after their sheep, they had to have something like this. Nabadi, which some cultures call burga. It's made of wool again, of felt. It's very thick, but they say that it has a thermal property, so that it's property of thermal regulation. So in winter it's very warm, while in summer it keeps you cool. That's what they say. I haven't tried it on, so I can't say from my experience, but that's what we know about it. And there is also a specific hat for those shepherds, which is called papachi. And also, it's also used by the other people, other cultures in the same area. One of the funny and interesting things I wanted to show you is in the next slide. Georgian skiing, or well, it's not exactly skis, but kind of, yes, because these constructions, let's say, were used for walking in snow and in ponds. So you could slide. And it's probably the ancestor of skis, what we call skiing and what we are using for skiing these days. Early Georgian ancestor to it. Another distinct class in the beginning of the 20th century in Tbilisi was Qarachokheli. And their clothing, can we move on to the next slide? This was a group of craftsmen, and also they were called firefighters because they were usually very careful and attentive people, and they were looking after the areas in which they lived. So whenever they looked, they saw fire, they would take care of putting the fire down. So they were also associated with being firemen or firefighters, but mainly they were craftsmen, and usually they used to work on this repoussé art in terms of making silver belts especially, and silver swords and silversmiths. And they used to wear very distinct and different kind of clothing. Usually they could be called Qarachokheli Chokha, because Chokha, actually it's it's interesting that Chokha, the word itself, is not a Georgian word. It comes from Arabic, I think, and it means wool. So whatever was made of wool in Georgia in the beginning was called Chokha, especially men's clothing, but then it developed into this specific shape and form. So these Qarachokhelis used to wear very distinct, very specific hats, looking like papach again, very tall, kind of tall papachi. And they used to wear these long black dresses and very specific and special boots. And their belts were absolutely inseparable part of their clothing. And their belts they used to make themselves, the silver ones. Now, I don't know if I told you about these Georgian costumes and Georgian clothing in a very interesting and intriguing way, but this is just a teaser, you know. In order to have a full picture, you really need to come to Georgia and embrace this visual performance yourself. One of the things I can tell you is that besides the fact that this clothing connects us with our past, it also gives us confidence in our future. It gives us hope that if Georgia, this small country in the Caucasus, survived multiple invaders throughout the centuries, it means that it will do so in the future. It will break the chains of Russian occupation and embrace the big European family as it is stated in our constitution. And that is probably one of the main reasons why Georgians are so proud of wearing their past and their cultural heritage in their clothing as a sign of displaying their own identity, their own with their own roots, where they come from. If you enjoyed my today's podcast, and if you're interested in the future to watch my channel, please don't forget to press the subscribe and like button. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.